You are listening to Cemetery Confessions, the world's #1 goth talk podcast.
Hello and welcome back to Cemetery Confessions. This month we are featuring Charlotte, the vocalist of Nox Novacula, which you should be familiar with. We actually reviewed one of their EPs in 2018 on a previous episode. I think that one was titled The 90s Till Now, but I've been a big fan of theirs ever since, so it's a absolute thrill to have Charlotte on to chat with. Today, we're going to be talking about her history in music, her philosophy on music and subculture. We'll get into politics, which is something she's very passionate about. We're going to talk about women in music, touring, and just have a general chat about the underground music scene today. Of course, you can find their music on Bandcamp and find them on Facebook. Just search for Nox Novacula. But let's get into the conversation. As always, I am the Count. I'm here with my co-host, Trey. Charlotte, thank you so much for joining us. Tell us a little about when you first started getting into goth or alternative culture and how that came about for you.
It was really from the get-go. I got really into like punk, and I mean it was just kind of like around me growing up. I grew up in New York City, and my parents are kind of like were involved in the music scene. My dad's a musician.
Nice.
So that whole like New York City punk scene was kind of it was always kind of there, like a backdrop of growing up. I don't know. I really always, I think, felt kind of like a weirdo. And I like found a scene growing up in New York City that wasn't necessarily like, it wasn't really like necessarily goth or punk. I mean, it was just kind of like a group of misfits that we all found each other, and we would go to like a lot of shows, like ABC No Rio shows and stuff like that. And that's kind of how I found myself in like an alternative music scene, I guess. But I never really identified as goth or a punk or anything really, just mostly like a weirdo growing up, I would say.
What about, so that obviously continued into your adult years then? You just connected with the scene and...
It's always been kind of like alternative music has been a big part of my life, and I think it's pretty equally like punk and metal and goth and really all sorts of different kinds of music. I think I'm really lucky here in Seattle to have a really, what's the word I'm looking for? Like our scene here is
eclectic.
Not, yes, it's a very eclectic scene. There's a lot of different types of people, and there's a lot of crossover, which was, you know, I felt really at home here in Seattle. Like it took me a while when I moved here, but I think it's really cool that we have this eclectic scene of, you know, punks and metalheads and goths and weirdos and artists, and it all kind of bleeds into itself, into each other.
So a lot of people, you'll see like goths at metal shows and stuff like that.
For sure, yeah.
Awesome.
And that's
cool.
This is like a new thing that I'm starting to see is more and more like really mixed bill shows. We've been trying to do that here in Seattle when we book shows or when we're playing shows, is like have totally like different kinds of music, or we'll have like a metal band and then a goth band and then like an industrial band and then like have someone DJing like dance music. And I just love that because it speaks to all the different parts of alternative music that I love. Because I've always been like a punk and a metalhead and a goth at the same time.
Yeah.
And kind of felt weird about that for a while. Like if I go to metal shows a lot, but like, you know, these people will think I'm weird for also listening to lots of like electronic and dance music, or, you know, it's like not feeling at home really in one scene. And I think that's why in Seattle, I really started to feel at home here because I found a lot of other people who had eclectic tastes as well.
That's really
That's
cool that
yeah.
venues and promoters are putting those type of shows together. Because I'm used to, most shows that I've seen lately, either around here or other places in the area. Um, the show itself is sort of a single genre thing. The artists are all part of the same group. The crowd may be relatively diverse, and usually it is relatively diverse. But I love that out there they're putting together shows where the actual performance you're watching is
Yeah.
diverse to allow everybody to kind of get a little bit of what they want, and to also let all that cross pollination and whatnot happen, so people get the different ideas and inspirations from disparate genres. So I think that's really cool.
I
Yeah,
agree. Yeah.
it's a cool thing. And like I said, it's a newer, I feel like it's a newer thing happening here, but I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that, you know, the goth scene in Seattle is definitely starting to grow, but I mean, it's always been kind of like a small, secluded thing, and I feel like it is branching out right now. Um, but there's not a ton of like goth or death rock bands.
Mm.
So there's like a few, but there's not a ton of local bands. So, when we're booking shows or when other people are booking shows, it's kind of like, all right, well, we're just gonna make this work, and then it kind of like an accidental thing, but it's ended up being a really cool thing, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I like we need a reunion tour for Sisters of Mercy and Public Enemy, I think is what we're getting
Oh
at.
my god.
Uh
Maybe
I
not. I don't know. I saw
I might go to
Sisters
that.
of Mercy recently, and yeah.
oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But I agree with the sentiment.
Yeah. Is Seattle, I don't remember. Is Seattle where they have the referral only goth club, or am I thinking of a different place?
Yes, we do
Okay.
have a private members only goth club. It's not like that hard to get into.
Mhm.
But like it's a private club because it kind of gives them a little more freedom.
Right.
Like you can like smoke inside. It's one of the last
Ooh,
places.
I won't
Yeah,
tell
I
anyone.
know.
Yeah.
But I think that's legal. I don't know if I should have said that, but it's legal
Oh,
because
okay.
it's a private club, I believe.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, that would be the Mercury here in Seattle is I would say our only goth club. I mean, we used to have like a couple more, but I think they've all closed now.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, so kind of going back to what I agree. I feel like there was a point in time where there was a lot more pressure to, I don't know, hyper specify of like what kind of box you fit into. And I feel like that's kind of people are caring less and less about that, which is
Mhm.
very cool. I'm interested to hear if that sentiment kind of carries over to how you see the band, because I know especially in the 80s, even into the 90s, like I know Monica Richards had this point of view as well. But the like really hating to be called, I mean, for them specifically, it was a goth band, but just any kind of genre association. Do you have that? Do you have a similar sentiment to that?
um yeah, I don't know. I think we joke about it a lot about the like like the Andrew Eldritch like I'm not a
Mhm.
goth sentiment. Um
And proceeds to be super goth.
right.
Yeah.
I usually call our band a death rock band. That label just seems to fit well in my opinion. I mean, I think we've definitely called ourselves a goth band. It's just I feel like in this day I don't I no longer know what that means when you call a band a goth band. Like there's so many
Mm.
different versions. There's so many different like aspects to that genre now over the years. So I guess that's why I tend to go with the death rock thing just it because I think at heart we're still like a rock and roll band. Like we're a rock and roll band that has like a darker kind of feel.
Right. Yeah, I I think genre is, as a tool, is useful, but you can definitely over kind of like the that conundrum of too punk for goth, too goth for punk kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you start caring too much about, I only hang out with this kind of person or I only listen to this kind of music, then you've lost my interest
Right.
as an individual. But
Yeah, I've always felt the genre was useful as a descriptive term, not a proscriptive term. And a lot of
mm,
people who become fans start getting into that sort of proscriptive thing where things, violate whatever boundaries they decide are part of the scene and sell out or become fakers or something, whatever the
mm,
Mm-hmm.
the term
mm,
du jour is. But really, it's a great descriptive term. It's a great way of saying if you like this, you might like these other things. But
Right.
it's not a way to say this band is this style, so they can only do these things. That is the death of music, really.
yeah, yeah. I kind of skipped over this, but I wanted to get a feeling for what your history with making music is as well.
I definitely was obsessed with music from a really young age. I kind of dabbled a little bit when I was younger. I played guitar, and I was in a pretty embarrassing, like, punk rock band when I was like a teenager with my friends that, we played a few shows here and there, but it'll never see the light of day. It's quite embarrassing. Um, and then I didn't make music for a long time. There were, well, there's a lot of reasons. I've gone through some stuff in my life, and I spent a really long time kind of not paying attention to that part of me. And it wasn't until recently, I mean, Nox Novacula is like the first active touring band I've ever been in. So that, I mean, it's kind of funny, like, to be this late in life and then just like rediscovering um that part of me as far as from the creative side of it.
Mm. Well, I mean, you wouldn't be able to tell. You're an incredible musician, and you have a really good. I mean, I've seen the. I can't. I'm gonna forget the name of the radio station now, but where you guys did the played some live sets.
Oh, the
Um,
KXP.
KXP, yeah. That was a amazing performance because I haven't had the pleasure of seeing you play live, but um, yeah, and I think that's really important as well because one of my general life philosophies is that you should always be trying new things and learning and discovering new aspects of yourself. So I don't think there's anything. I think that's actually an asset rather than you know anything else.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where it's something that I've always known that I was capable of and always wanted to do,
Mm,
and just had to wait for the right time in my life for just the things to line up. And sometimes I get down on myself that, like, I've wasted a lot of time, and I can't. I don't know. It's not really a helpful way to think, though, because it's just the time was right now. So
yeah. No, and I think that's important for people to hear as well because I mean, I guess you could call it imposter syndrome, but
Yeah.
I've mentioned this, to I don't see myself as anything more than just a dumbass talking about stupid shit on the internet. But some people apparently are surprised when I am like, I get nervous before shows. I feel like what I'm doing isn't very good, and I question if I should be doing it. And people are surprised about that for some reason. But I think it's just something everybody deals with to
Oh,
some
yeah.
extent.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, the syndrome is like, I know it all too well, and it's definitely something that really kept me back for a really, really long time when it comes to being creative. It's one thing to
Yeah.
to feel like you're creative. It's another thing to share that with other people,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
that's a whole level of vulnerability that it's really difficult.
Yeah.
And for me, it took me a long time to get there.
Yeah. So I did want to ask about what your experience was like at Return to the Batcave because it's something that a lot of us kind of fawn over from a distance. But you actually got to go. I don't know how much time you had to hang out and chat with people, but what was
Oh,
that like?
oh, it was amazing. It was so incredible. Yeah, we were there for I think we were there for two full days. I mean, first of all, like just touring in Europe was really an amazing experience and something that I'm like eternally grateful to have had the opportunity to do.
Mm.
That's really like for me like a bucket goal kind of, bucket list once in a lifetime thing. And
Right.
uh yeah, Return of the Batcave was such a fun experience. I have all the best words about Tomas, who puts that thing on. He really like pours his heart and soul into it. Um, and it was just really like amazing to meet so many people from all over the world, to meet so many different bands that I had heard of and like seen around but never got to like meet or see them live. I mean, it was really like an unreal experience. And one of the most fun shows I think I've ever played.
I can only imagine, and in my dreams. But yeah, very cool. I wanted to get your perspective on this because as just sort of a participant in goth culture, I guess, it seems to me like, especially now, the community has been really supportive of each other and connected and defending, kind of policing itself in a way that's a bad term, but like kicking out racists and
Mhm,
homophobes and stuff like that. But
mhm,
I'm curious if you have a similar feeling as a musician. So for example, I've been reading Mikey Bean's new book Phantoms, which is about the LA death rock scene in the 80s.
mhm,
And a lot of the book you get this sense of how I think they use the phrase incestuous, how incestuous the music scene was, where you have just
mhm,
like dozens of bands sharing members. And think early on they're talking about 45 Grave, and you've got Don Bulls, the drummer, playing in the Germs, and in Vox Pop and 45 Grave, and then Vox Pop shared members with Nervous Gender, and you had Dinah Cancer singing in other bands and stuff like that. Do you feel like now, obviously that's a different time, but do you feel like
mhm.
in the modern music scene it's as collaborative and supportive as that, or is it more competitive?
I don't see it, at least from the scene that I'm involved with, and I feel like here on the West Coast, I don't see it as being very competitive. I definitely feel like we have a community of bands here and Oakland, a lot of bands in California and Portland um, that kind of have a similar thing. There's a lot of sharing members and just like we all know each other. And I definitely feel like there's a family there,
Mm,
like and it goes bigger than just the West Coast. I think from after, touring and also being in Europe, I feel like there is a kind of a web of these different bands that are out right now that are doing their thing that um we're all kind of working together.
yeah, it's not, it's kind of, I was just wondering because it's hard to know. I hear people in bands talk about their relationship with other musicians, and it's nice to hear those platitudes, but you also kind of never really know if people are just total assholes when they're not, in public or whatever. So, I mean, there's always going to be
I
some of that, right? But
Yeah, I mean, as far as like the scene right now, as far as like the touring bands that kind of like we've had the pleasure to either like book shows with or play with them in their towns or like playing with other bands and festivals, like I have really been blown away by how many really amazing people that I've been
mm,
able to meet over the past few years, like how many new friendships that I've made from just playing different fests and different shows around the US and in Europe.
nice,
Like I really have very few bad things to say about anyone.
good. Well, that's lovely to hear. Then I like that.
Do
Yeah,
the
I think we have a good scene right now. We have a lot of good folks.
the bands out there, or the musicians out in your scene, ever like get together to do big collaborative, just impromptu, either jam sessions or just collaborate on some sort of a, I guess, casual project, not necessarily making a super group or anything, but just casually getting together and trying to make something as a group?
Yeah, as far as like the goth bands and like post-punk bands and stuff, I don't really see a lot of that going on. I mean, maybe it does that I'm not aware of. There's definitely a lot more of that sort of stuff going on with like stoner metal prog
Mm,
scene, I think. Um, but yeah, I don't see so much of it. Like there's just
Okay.
not there's honestly not a ton of bands like to really collaborate.
Hmm.
we're doing a stoner collaboration in a couple weeks for a movie night, but it has nothing to do with music. So,
Nice.
cool. So I want to. I know this is kind of a rote question, but I don't have the chance to talk to a ton of musicians, so I still like to ask this when I can. How reasonable is it to try and make a living off of music in 2020?
You know, if you can do that, good for you. I
Okay.
don't know how. I don't know really. I don't think I really know anyone that is making like a living off of playing music. I mean, I know some people who are able to kind of get by, like, by just being like constantly on tour.
Hmm.
And usually, like, it's some sort of mixture of like, well, you're always on tour, so you're not really paying rent and
Right.
you're just,
Yeah.
breaking even.
Living in a van.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't think anyone I know is in a band or making music because they think they're gonna make any money off of it. And if they are, I think they're
Hmm.
in the
Hmm.
wrong field right now.
Hmm.
I mean, it's unfortunate. I mean, it's not about money, obviously. It's unfortunate that like we still, have to
Yeah. I
make a
mean,
living
yeah.
outside of that.
Yeah. Wanting to pay for your basic needs isn't necessarily about just making money. It's just
Right, yeah.
part of living in
Right.
America. Well, the reason I asked is more
Yeah.
because I've seen a lot of I don't know, YouTubers and bloggers looking at this idea of how musicians make most of their money through physical sales at shows, and the question of like,
Mhm.
now that nobody can go to shows anymore, how do we support musicians? Like, did you get any money from streaming, or is it
We ourselves, like, we
Mm,
self-support our band, so all the money that we make goes into
mm.
the band. Like, we don't even, yeah, we don't pocket anything. So like we sell merch online and stuff, and I have to say I was really really grateful for a lot of people came through and bought merch from us on Bandcamp the other day when the Bandcamp was
Yeah, the
doing like a
Friday.
thing. They were giving, yeah, all the proceeds to the bands. And I'm like eternally grateful to anyone who it's still like it's funny to me that I'm like, really, people would like want to like buy our
Yeah.
music like on purpose. But we really appreciate it because every cent of that money goes into like recording a new album and making more merch and putting it back into the band. So that's how we do what we do. So
So that, yeah, okay, cool. So that's still the best way to, buy t-shirts, buy records, that kind of thing.
yeah, and
I
I
have
mean,
Okay.
hopefully it's not, hopefully there'll be shows again soon. Hopefully this
Mm-hmm.
will be back to being able to
Make out
see
with
our
each other.
friends and
Yeah.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
see bands in a live setting because
Yeah.
it's hard to not, to be
Yeah.
deprived of that.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
You take it for granted sometimes until it's gone, and you're like, man, I would give anything just to be in a room full of people,
Yeah.
seeing a show.
Yeah. I agree, and I hate being in rooms full of people, and I even feel that
Yeah,
way, so.
I know.
Cool. So I wanted to ask about, because you have an LP in on the way. Well, actually, maybe I should just ask you about that first. What's like what do we have a general release date? Like, what's going on with the album you're all working on?
Yeah, so we are the plan is to go into the studio next month.
Mhm.
We have like our studio time booked out, and we're just crossing our fingers right now and hoping that, everyone stays healthy and, everything
Yeah.
works out. And, knock on wood, we'll be in the studio next month. We have the new album written. We're really excited about it. We're, working with a producer we're really excited about. So yeah, we're just
Cool.
crossing our
Good.
fingers, hoping that works out. And, I'm not sure about a release date yet.
Yeah. Fair enough.
It's I don't know. I really want to put it out on vinyl. Hopefully that's not going to be a problem. It's really hard to say right now in this this day and age, like what is going on with the world.
Yeah, these questions were a lot simpler to answer like 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot.
I'm like, I want to put it out. I also want to like go on tour, when we have a new album. And so hopefully I think, the answer is as soon as we possibly can.
At the moment, though, you have 2 EPs and 1 LP available.
So we have 1 EP and a 7-inch, and then we have Tomas from Return to the Batcave, he put everything out on a CD, and it's just a collection of both the EP and the 7-inch.
Oh, okay. Is that on his website then?
Yeah, we have. Well, we have it on our.
Too?
Yeah, we have it on our Bandcamp.
Oh, yeah, I see. Okay, yeah, you're right. Yep, very cool. So my question then, though, is, but yes, we'll have that, and of course, everything we mentioned will be linked in the show notes. So if you don't already own these albums, please go buy them. Also, their shirts are really cool. I've got some, and they're fantastic. This question came up a little while ago about the expectations around album releases now, whereas 20 years ago everything was about releasing an album, but a lot of bands now are putting out singles or EPs, and some bands are only putting out singles and EPs and don't do any like full 10 or more track albums. Do you have any opinions about that and like that formula changing?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I am a little bit old school when it comes to albums. Like I love vinyl. I collect records. So I have a soft spot for like full albums released on vinyl, and that's definitely like I want to release a full-length album on vinyl. That's like a goal. I totally get it though right now, like why a lot of bands are just releasing singles or EPs. I mean, it's just the way the industry is now. Like it's not so focused on full albums. And bands have the freedom to like, most bands aren't really on labels, or they don't act the same way that they used to with like contracts and stuff. So you really have the freedom to release music as you make it. And I think that's cool. But I guess I just am a little old school. Like I love an album that's cohesive, that not necessarily has to tell a story in the way that it's like a concept album, but there is something to me that is special when a band releases an album that is really strong front to back and is thought out and works as a whole. And I do appreciate that.
Yeah, there's always added meaning. I mean, you can look at individual songs, get meaning out of them, but sometimes you can add extra layers by how it's packaged, what songs are preceding it, songs are following it. Even if there's not that thread of a story, there's still this whole piece that contains information and an experience exactly that informs the enjoyment of all the individual components. Whereas if it's just a single, nothing else really informs it except maybe a relationship you already have with the band or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever asked you this, Trey, but from like recently for me, the last couple of years, I think I only listen to albums. If I hear about a new band, I'll be like, okay, let me go listen to their album. And if it's just a single, if they only have singles out, I'm like, I have to, this is annoying. I don't like it. But I feel like I'm in the minority for that, but I'll definitely prefer just give me a 10 or more track album. I'll put that on and enjoy it and then do something else, Do you, is that?
I do
Yeah.
usually do stuff like that when I'm trying to discover new artists. If I'm like, oh, this artist sounds interesting or this album sounds interesting, I will try to listen to it as a whole.
Hmm.
I'm also addicted to, when I discover a new artist, checking out their entire discography, not just the
Mm,
greatest hits. So I like to
yeah.
hear all of it, usually in order, because I am interested in the progression of ideas, the progression of how they change. And sometimes I really hate certain aspects of the bands, like, oh, this album I love, but the other ones, nah, I could do without. But I do like to try to get that sort of holistic understanding. Now, when I'm just listening on my own to stuff that I already have, I'm a total addict to putting my entire music collection on shuffle, which is a ridiculous schizophrenic trip of everything, because I
Yeah.
don't I don't pay attention to genre necessarily either. So I'll have some sort of twee pop followed by death metal, followed by noise, followed by classical, just kind of all over the place.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm definitely guilty of that as well.
Yeah, I actually kind of flipped on um greatest hits albums, because that used to be, I love greatest hits albums, and now I don't know. I don't know if it's because I have so much easier access to music now, where it's like, why would I bother with a greatest hits when I can just listen to everything? I don't know what it is, but
And
I
you can
I
roll
don't
your own
like this
greatest hits
either.
album on Spotify
Yeah, yeah.
or
Mm.
in whatever your app or music listening thing of choices, because you can individually separate them and make your own whatever. So
Mm-hmm.
it's nice to see the curated ones, especially when it's a greatest hits album released by the band rather than by the label.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you can kind of
Mhm.
get, oh, this is so and so's, what they thought was their best. And sometimes that'll have some hidden gems, some B-sides. It's like, oh, yeah, I hadn't really given that one a good listen, but yeah, I can see why they are really proud of that one. So I'm still interested in those as an insight into the band. But yeah, I'm not as big on greatest hits as or compilations like I used to be, though I still like compilations for music discovery. Again, kind of like we discussed in a previous episode, um, music discovery has moved to other avenues, and I think there are better ways of doing it than compilations. Though sometimes having a curated selection of things has a lot of value.
So, you mentioned you have finished writing the new album. What's your kind of process for writing music? How do you go from, I need to have an idea, to a fully fleshed out track?
I would say that we were very collaborative in our writing process as a band. Like we typically write our songs together. Um
Hmm.
so I mean that's just like been really helpful. Like we just work really well together and everyone's able to kind of bring their own, part. So we usually write songs just like at band practice, and typically someone has, something, a riff or, whatever it is, and we kind of just build on it collaboratively.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty much how we've written like almost all of our songs.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, that's funny. I was just listening to a different interview where the band, I won't say who they were, but the the guy was basically like, "Yeah, we don't ever see each other in person. I just send the tracks over. We don't like each other very much." I was
Yeah.
like, "Okay."
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a lot of bands or that, or one person does the, lion's share of the writing.
Mm-hmm.
Um but no, I mean, I'm really grateful, like we as a band get along really well. We're all friends. Like this is how it started, was that we were, all friends with each other, that would like, we were hanging out at like enough goth nights that we're like, wait, let's
Mm,
just do this, let's just have our own
right.
band. Um, and it's kind of continued to be that way. So yeah, it makes it enjoyable. It makes it fun that we can enjoy hanging out with each other. We can enjoy writing together and playing together. And I am eternally grateful for that we work so
Mm.
well together, because I definitely know plenty of people who have been in bands with people they can't stand. So,
Well,
yeah,
it's
I guess
also
we're
hard.
lucky.
Yeah. I mean, it's also, I guess any relationship is kind of like, you can be friends with somebody, but once you start doing something with them,
Mhm.
especially over a long period of time, I mean, people change and people
Yeah.
care about different things.
Yeah,
Do you
for sure.
do you have any advice for like how to, because a lot of people in our audience are working on creative projects with other people, do you have any advice for like how to balance personalities and creative desires and that interpersonal kind of thing, or is it just hang out with people you enjoy hanging out with?
I mean, yeah, I mean, I hate to sound like, I guess, maybe not everyone is so lucky,
Yeah.
but definitely it helps to, I mean, work with people that you enjoy being around. I mean, you don't have to be like best friends,
Hmm.
with everyone, but
Cool. So, okay. So, a follow up question to that, and this is just something that I've been kind of thinking about for myself recently as I'm looking at the stuff that I'm making and thinking about, like, okay, what's good about this? What don't people like about this? How do I improve it? Do you give any consideration to um the feeling responsible for being like, expectations of you're a person that influences other people or you're in the, public eye of the scene or whatever, or do you just
you mean like when I'm
making music or
uh-huh.
like hanging out with people or, because sometimes I get in my head about, oh, people know who I am, I need to behave in a specific way, or I need to, and just kind of overanalyze everything.
Well, I think, no matter what is going on, I'm always overanalyzing
Mhm.
everything I do. Um, that's definitely a character defect of mine is I'm, overly conscious of myself and
Yeah.
constant fear of humiliation. That's definitely a theme
Yep.
um in my life. That being said, I don't know I don't know if I view myself as like someone uh who like people know who I am. Um
That's probably the best way to think about it
yeah.
because you definitely are, but just like don't acknowledge it and it doesn't exist.
Yeah, no, like I think like I'm gonna feel like people are looking at me and laughing behind my back all the
Mhm.
time, no matter
Aw.
what. That's like my own,
Yeah.
paranoia, and I've totally come to terms with that. So, like,
Mhm.
I will always be the nerdy kid in school. That's just who I am at heart. So, like, I've just had to deal with that and just and make it like I just don't even pay attention to it anymore. I think the older I get, the more comfortable I am with myself and just it's not even comfortable, it's like the less I care, you
Yeah.
know?
Mhm.
So I just the less I can care about it, the more I can just be myself and yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
Yeah.
I generally
sometimes you just have to lean into the cringe.
yeah. Well, I think like generally I try to be like a good person. I'm not, I try not to be shitty to other people and so I don't really have to worry about that, you know.
Yeah. So just kind of sticking on the theme of questions around the band. I think this is different in the goth scene specifically, but obviously I I don't make music, and yeah, I don't make music. But in general, music, I feel like music is still kind of seen as a boys club. So I'm wondering if you have had to overcome any obstacles to feel like you were taken seriously or be considered part of, the scene.
Sure. I mean, I think that any femme who plays music is gonna say they've had some experience with like if you're playing shows, like you've probably had some experience with like a sound guy who's a dick who
Mm,
talks down to you or, something like that. But I will say that when it comes to this scene that like we're in, when it comes to like goth and punk and post-punk, I really see that a lot less than I see it in other music scenes
yeah.
and um I'm glad that's the case. I mean, not saying that it doesn't happen at all, but like being a person who, also has gone to metal shows for years and I love metal, I love death
Mm,
metal. It's always been like I've always gone to like metal shows and I mean, there's a really stark comparison there, though, when you look at who you see on stage playing those
Mm,
shows. Like, it really is a boys' club, and it's getting better. But when we play shows, like our band, it's so. I mean, we were just talking about this the other day that like it's really rare that we play a show with all dude bands. Like
mm,
it's just not
yeah,
even. And maybe part of that is also living in Seattle and like also it's not quite as much of a boys club here. I can't really speak for other cities, but
sure.
it's it's less of a thing. I think even in my lifetime I've seen it change where it's not really like noticeable now. Like if you like we'll play tons of shows where like there's women in every band that played and it's not like a thing. Like it's not oh, all female band set, or like it doesn't
Mm,
have to be called out because
like tokenism.
yeah,
Yeah.
Right.
exactly. I mean, it's I think it's becoming more and more just like normal and I think that the goth and like post-punk scene is really at the forefront of that. I mean, I think I see more diverse bands with that kind of music than in really like any other genre that I go to shows.
Yeah, I think it really helps that, historically too, both goth and post-punk have major female artists as pillars at the very beginning and throughout
Yeah.
the history. There have always been not just a band with a woman, but a band who's known for a female presence, either an all-female band like the Slits
Mhm.
or something like Susie and the Banshees,
Yeah.
where, it's the female presence in the band
Nobody gives a
that's
shit about
most well
Budgie.
known.
We just like Susie.
Actually really
That's
Uh,
like Budgie too, but
yeah.
yeah, no, that's absolutely right though. I mean, like I think that has a lot to do with it that it's, there historically has been representation um in the punk and goth music scene and that really it it does a lot. Like you cannot deny that seeing that like being a younger woman and seeing that is it really makes a difference knowing that oh that's something I can do.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really involved in the metal scene anymore, but I remember in college when I was into metal a lot more, it was kind of a lot of the dude bro metal guys were and if you had a woman as a vocalist, it was like a joke, like, oh, that's not real metal.
Mm.
And it was really, really shitty. And I really hope that's changed. But that was a big deal. That was a
Yeah,
big problem
no,
for a
for
long
sure. I
time.
mean it's definitely changing. Like I know there are some bands right now, like death metal bands that have like really incredible women playing guitar, playing drums. Like but it's just to me, it's crazy that it's still like a novelty, I think, for people,
Yeah.
when they see it. It's like,
Yeah, it is.
whoa, a chick playing guitar,
Yeah.
Um, and like I said, it's changing. It's just it's I really do feel like the scene that we're in is really good about being inclusive um
Mm.
at least like more so than a lot of other types of music.
So I think we have a little extra time here. So I've got a couple like quick fire tour questions if we can do those real fast. So
Sure.
just like, do you have a favorite venue? I know you mentioned Return to the Batcave, but favorite venue you've played in?
Oh, that is hard. Okay. Yeah, Return to the Batcave was amazing. I have to say that playing Zorro Fest in Leipzig was also
Ah,
incredible. That was another like mind-blowing experience. Is kind of one of those things that like growing up as like a little in the like anarcho punk scene, you always heard tell of these European squats that just did these amazing things and like had these shows and these festivals, and it was kind of like this like legendary thing. So to actually see it and experience it firsthand was really cool, and kind of made me like brought me back to my youth of of that feeling.
Yeah. Very cool. You don't have to name names, but maybe worst experience on tour?
Worst experience on tour. Let's see. I'm trying to think right now. We played this bar. Oh my God, I can't even remember. I think it was in Eindhoven,
Okay.
Netherlands. I'm trying to remember. We played a lot of dates in a short amount of time. But we played this bar. It was like on a college strip, like Friday night. It was like a total college bar, I guess. And it was like a free show. And like no one was there for the show, but it was like packed, you know what I mean? So it's like a bunch of just like normie, whatever. And it was quite a bizarre experience. Like everyone's just kind of like, what the fuck is going on? But yeah, I don't know. It was still fun.
That is shitty. I went to I remember that reminds me of a show I went to in high school, and I can't remember what band it was, but it was a band from England that was like a folk metal band, and the singer was fucking incredible. I was just in love with her voice, and we went to this show in like this shitty little venue with like 20 people there. And when they played an acoustic set, because I don't know why, I don't know if it was the venue or what, but people were just walking around talking. I was the only person listening to the music. I was like, what planet am I on right now? Like, this band is amazing.
Yeah, it's always like, it's definitely not the first time that we've played a show to like a bunch of random people sitting in a bar that had no idea what they were getting themselves into, which is like, it's always interesting, but I always just kind of like lean into it when that's the case. I don't know. I almost just start like taunting the audience.
You might as well.
You know, when you look over and like some guy has his like hands over his ears, like, and you're just like, all right, let's go. I'm going to
make it louder.
Yeah, exactly.
And then any favorite songs or bands to play when you're traveling from place to place?
Ooh, what do we play? I'm trying to think. Like we play a lot of I always just play a lot of like industrial in the tour van, I feel like.
Okay, cool.
I like subjecting my bandmates to my in van dance music, and usually try to have a little in van dance party. Also a lot of 90s like acid house dance jams. That's my go-to.
Can always drive well with a 303.
Yeah.
Very cool. I kind of know this from following you on Facebook, but obviously activism and political conversations are really important to you. Do you tie that into your music at all?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the songs that I write when it comes to like writing lyrics and stuff, I mean, I would say a lot of them have, you know, a little bit of a political edge. I mean, obviously those things are important to me. A lot of what I think is justified anger at the state of, you know, this country, the state of the world, the way things are. Making music for me is definitely a cathartic experience that I you know, channel that into it. And it kind of keeps me sane, because I want to scream all the time because I'm just fucking pissed off. So definitely found a way to, you know, keep a little sanity. And even if it's like the song isn't necessarily about something specific, I still kind of channel that feeling a lot, because it needs to come out or I'm gonna explode, I feel like.
There is a catharsis to anarcho-punk screaming about eating the ruling class and murdering men and stuff like that. Like, there's something really special about that I really like.
Yeah, because
Um,
it's pure, I think,
yeah, exactly. Do you think? I mean, I don't know if we really talked about this, but do you feel like the scene, any scene, goth metal, whatever, do you feel like we need to become more politically active?
I mean, I think that, not even to break it down into like specific scenes, I think we all probably need to become more politically active. I mean,
Mm,
myself included. I kind of allowed myself to be really, I guess, apathetic, maybe would be the right word, for a long time. I think, as far as like being politically aware and left leaning, started for me as like a young kid, being like punk, being into like the anarcho punk kind of community, and being radicalized by the Iraq war and things like that.
mm,
And then for a long time I let it kind of just turn into apathy, because it's a lot. It's really, this the state of things right now are really fucked up, and it's really easy to just feel powerless, and like there's
mm,
nothing you can do, and like it doesn't matter. um but I think I'm starting to see people get more aware and get more involved, and I mean, I'm one of those people. Like, I've started to be more aware of actually putting my ideals like into action, and what I can do to try and make
mm.
some sort of difference, as futile as it seems sometimes.
Yeah. It does get really overwhelming. For me though, being goth, I guess this has more to do with being non-binary, but I feel like if I go out in public and I'm wearing makeup and I've got a crop top on and I'm being really femme and I'm just, you know, vibing, as the kids would say, I feel like even though I'm not directly actively producing change, I'm still normalizing a thing
Hmm.
in a way. And I think alternative cultures, and Trey, you kind of opened my mind to that, but the appearance of alternative culture really works to normalize alternative ways of being in the world, and that is inherently political, and that
Hmm.
does in some way enact change. So I think that's important as well. But
Yeah.
I would like to see, well, years ago when we interviewed William Faith and Scary Lady Sarah, William Faith talked about how he would go to a goth or death rock or punk show, and then the next morning everyone that was there would be out like protesting in the streets
Hmm.
for whatever was going on. And I do feel like we need more of that.
I absolutely agree with you. I mean, I think being in Europe was really an eye opener, especially
Mm,
because we kind of, we did more of a DIY tour, and we played lots of squats and a lot of collectives, and I really saw that in action. Like, I saw um what it looks like for people in a music scene, or just in people who are involved in like subculture, actually have like collectives, and do do things that do things for their community, whether it be putting on shows or like running fests, but more so, like, and also you go into all these places, and you see like, oh, you see like Antifa stuff everywhere, and you see a lot of like
mm,
politically charged sort of, it's just there. Like, you can
mhm,
feel that there is you can see that there's like activism going on. These people are like politically motivated, and that was eye opening, because you really don't see that as much here. I mean, there's not that it doesn't exist, but it's not as organized. And I think another problem is that it's like not cool here. You know what I mean?
mm,
Like,
yeah,
there's this sort of thing about being like a sort of nihilist and like, I don't care about anything.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's like cool. Whereas like it's not
Yeah.
cool to like care about these things. And I really wish that would stop being the case, because
Yeah.
I think that a lot of people who find themselves in the goth community, in the punk community, like people who listen to heavy music, dark music, I think a lot of these people do it because we are more sensitive and more empathetic. Um, and I think that can go either way, because sometimes if you're really a sensitive person, it can feel like too much, and it can be really easy to just turn that off
Yeah.
and, pretend that, you're like too cool. Um,
Yeah.
and I just wish as a community we could lean more into like having empathy for each other and fighting for people who are less fortunate than we are. And I know it's a lot. There's a lot to fight for, but
Well, I think as a country, historically speaking, America has been very big on this idea of the individual, the rugged individual, the great man, the person who bucks the trend, goes their own way,
Mm.
does everything on their own. And we tend to discount the idea of the power of community, the power of people getting together, collaborating, things like that. So we've had that myth. And then we had, of course, the very long history of anti-communism,
mhm,
anti-socialism, anti-communalism,
yeah,
anything like that became demonized. And unfortunately, while there are arguments on both sides regarding economic systems,
mhm,
that's beside the point, but it's the idea of doing stuff to help those in your community, doing stuff beyond just your family unit to build up a community. And I think things like subcultures are one of the few holdouts in American culture as a whole, where there is still some of that sense, where there is the sense that you sacrifice of yourself for the betterment of the community. You may, you know, buy music to support artists, even if you wouldn't have necessarily done that on your own. You may go out to events when you're not feeling up to it because you want to
mhm,
be out there supporting the scene. You want to keep them going. You're doing these things for this greater communal good. And I think that's something that a lot of subcultures seem to have a handle on. But as a society in this country, we struggle with still. But
mhm,
I think we are starting to move
mhm,
a little bit more towards this idea that we are all, kind of in this together. And, maybe that'll be, who knows, a silver lining from our current uh, nightmare situation is
yeah,
everybody is learning what it's like to truly be alone as we're all
yeah,
self-isolating. And maybe we'll see all these great stories about people who are volunteering and helping their community and lending their neighbors a hand, helping out at the hospital, things like that. So here's hoping that might be a silver lining that comes out of this, is a little bit more cohesive communalism within the country as a whole.
yeah. No, I totally agree. I think that we have our little subcultures, and they are communities, and we do look out for each other, and I'm very grateful for that. I think we have a really good community, a really strong community here in Seattle of people who make music. And again, like it's we really all work together, even across like genres and stuff like that.
I mean, Trey, you said economic systems aside, and I mean, feel free to anybody disagree with me, but I feel like there's still some degree of a capitalist streak in goth, with kind of valuing the acquiring of material objects as like cultural cachet or cultural capital. And and it also, again, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm very unfamiliar with the goth scene in Mexico, but it does seem like the scene down there is like you were saying in Europe. But it seems like as well that goth scene in Mexico is also a lot more politically driven, in part because of the disparity between classes, in a sense, where you have a lot of people living in poverty. And I think that we can, in America, kind of become comfortable with what we're doing, and some of that American idealism can seep into our conceptions of being goth and whatever. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think that in general, like class consciousness is something that Americans tend to maybe lack a little
Fail
bit
at.
more so than other
Mhm.
places. Um, and I think that really, uh, you know, I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with this, but um, yeah, I mean, I think greater class consciousness in general, I'm starting to see it change. I think I'm starting to. I think this thing that we're dealing with right now is maybe waking
Mm,
up people a little bit to
mm.
that fact. You know?
We can only hope.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, let's a final question, but also I'll ask you to reiterate, where you want to send people to find your music and stuff. But before we go, there is a long, proud tradition of shitty journalists asking goth musicians to define goth. So, as a proud and shitty journalist, I would like to carry on that tradition and ask you how you define goth.
Oh man, I don't. um. Yeah, I don't know how to.
Perfect.
Yeah,
That's fine.
that's.
Beautiful.
I don't know. I think maybe I'm gonna harken back to what I said before, which is that to me, I think goth music has a lot to do with sort of people who are like drawn to sort of dark themes and oh, not to
Mm.
sound so cliche, like people drawn to the darkness, but
Mhm.
I think it speaks to there's um something about being sensitive and having a sensitivity to the
Mhm.
world and having gone through struggle, and there's something about dark music that it it reaches it reaches people, at least for me. I guess I can only talk for myself, but
Mm.
I think that's what draws me to it, is that I've had my fair share of struggles and emotional turmoil and hardships, and yeah, I think that's what.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't
And
know.
I would agree with you. Uh, fe- I guess follow up. Feel free to not have an opinion on this, and I'll cut it out. That's fine. But like, do you feel like, I guess this doesn't have to apply to goth, but subculture in general. But do you feel like goth is just music? Because you used a lot of terms to describe community and emotional states and stuff. Do you feel like a subculture, and maybe goth specifically, is more than just music, or is it just about like we are into this kind of music?
No, I absolutely think it's more than just music. I think that a lot of it is finding a community that I think what a lot of us
Mm.
have in common is that maybe we were kind of weirdos, we felt
Yeah.
like, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that goes for really any subculture, but when you grow up and you just feel like you don't really belong and you feel like you're a weirdo and nobody gets you, and there's something about finding a community of other people that have felt exactly the same way, and all of a sudden you can celebrate the things that maybe made you different, or made you like nerdy, or the reason that
Yeah.
people made fun of you. And I mean, this sounds so hokey and cliche, but I think that's what you know that's what our subcultures are for us. There are like the family, the community that we find that allows us to be ourselves, without fear of like having to change who we are.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's as my dear friend Michelle, who is I can speak colloquially known as the Queen of Goth on our podcast, has said before, it's perfectly fine to Jesus Christ, what is happening? I've had too many beers. This is what's happening. It's sometimes it's okay to just embrace your cliches, and I think that's something we can all take to heart. But yeah, I totally agree with you. I feel like, especially because I've been reading this book, Phantoms. Just to use an example from there, they have interviews with the members of 45 Grave, and they talk about theatrical influences from Alice Cooper and thematic influences from B horror movies, and
totally.
you know, fashion is a big part of it. You've got Andy Sexgang in the intro to what's the book? The Art of Gothic. In the preface to that, he talks about how like absurdism and Dadaism were influences on the music and the scene, and I think that that's just part of like being human, and part of coming together is having these bigger than yourself ideas that you incorporate into being part of a community. So I think that's important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a good point to make, as you were mentioning all of these big artists and stuff and their influences. If all of the artists paid attention to that same adage that people are banning around goth being just about the music and it just being solely focused on the music, how much music can you make solely about other music? I mean, don't you need some other things to pull from, some other pieces of inspiration, be it philosophy or art, history, politics, activism, whatever? You need those elements. You need to be passionate about those elements to create the music for other people to be passionate about. And if everybody believed it was just about the music would basically spiral in on itself and vanish, I think.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. All right. Well, this was a lot of fun. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Let me know, I guess let everybody know where, I mean, I'm sure there's a couple people who don't know about Nox Novacula, but where can we find your music and like website and that kind of stuff?
I mean, we have a Bandcamp. You can find us at noxnovacula.bandcamp.com, I believe. We have like merch and music on there. We're also on Spotify. Like, you know, please, if you want to listen, by whatever means.
Very cool. And I'll have those linked in the show notes, so please go check them out. Thanks again, Charlotte, for hanging out with us. That was really a lot of fun. If you are new to the show, I hope you will take a look at our previous episodes. Stick around for our next upcoming show. If you liked this one, you may also enjoy our recent interview with Travis of Nightbreed Recordings. We talk a lot about the history of that record label and the goth scene in the 90s. But coming up in 2 weeks on May 2nd, we've got a new episode where we're going to be taking a look at Gothic literature. Actually, this will be our second episode on this. The first one was a few years ago, but we're going to have on Leela Taylor, who wrote the book Darkly. Fantastic book. I recommend everyone check that out. We'll also be inviting on Lygia Resurrected of YouTube, and we will have our Queen of Goth, Michelle, with us as well. If you want to get early access to that episode, listen to us chat live or get the edited version, if you want to get some cool merch and other stuff like that, you can head over to our Patreon page, which is patreon.com/Cemetery Confessions, to get a look at all the different fun things you can get for supporting the show. I hope you're all doing well, keeping busy, staying active, not getting too overwhelmed or cooped up with everything that's going on. And if you are out there, again, I hope you are staying safe. I do have one more announcement. This is a kind of a last minute thing. I'll bring this up again on a future episode, but we have just added a brand new podcast to the Belfry Network. If you don't know The Belfry Network is the network I started for podcasts. So if you enjoy listening to this show, but you want to hear other people talk about stuff around our kind of spooky subculture, you can just search the Belfry Network in whatever podcast app you use to listen to shows. And or you can go to the website, which is thebelfry.rip, and check out all the other podcasts that are producing awesome content. But we've just added a brand new podcast called the Arcane Machine Podcast. This show focuses more on the industrial scene, so if you're into that kind of music, you definitely want to check this out, although they do talk a lot about both crossover bands between goth and industrial, and also just straight up goth music. But the two hosts of the show take just deep dives into music that they're into. They kind of take the thematic approach like we do, where they focus on a specific aspect of music or of culture, and they play a lot of music as well. So you won't just be listening to people chat about music. You'll get to actually listen to music, and then listen to knowledgeable individuals go in depth on the production of that music, the band itself, the history of the band, their history with the band, and a bunch of fun chat. So I definitely recommend you can check that out either at arcanemachine.net or just by subscribing to the Belfry Network. So hopefully that we can all provide some levity, some entertainment, and some escape during these trying times. Thank you all so much for spending time with me. I hope to see you on our next episode, but until then, stay dark.
The preceding program is a member of the Belfry, a network of blogs, podcasts, and videos for the darkly inclined. Go to thebelfry.rip for more information.